So my first question for you is, what do you see as the greatest challenge for my generation of students
Oh,
in
okay.
Utah here?
Greatest challenge for your generation. Okay. Um, well, I mean, there are several challenges that will certainly affect your generation. One of the greatest, unfortunately, is going to be climate change. The environment is changing very rapidly, and we're seeing that manifested by rising temperatures, rising oceans, very erratic storms, the wildfires that we saw devastate the continent of Australia, as well as Oregon and California. And we're seeing the smoky air right now, and even here. And even yesterday, my family and I took a trip up Logan Canyon. We went up to Tony Grove and we drove over to Bear Lake, and the environment is just so dry. It is just tinderbox dry. And my dad, who was the dean of the College of Natural Resources for 30 years, he was remarking that this is the worst year he has ever seen it. And he spent his whole career working in the national forest lands around here. And he was really remarking how sad it was. So I think that really that's going to be a tremendous challenge for people your age. And, you know, my children, I have children your age, grandchildren. You're going to have to learn how to live in an environment and adapt to the changing climate and do what you can to mitigate that and to help improve that.
Okay. And as if you were elected into office, how are you going to help preserve these natural spaces and lands and combat climate change within Utah?
Oh, absolutely. Well, preserving Utah's public lands is really one of my three platforms. You know, I'm a registered nurse, so healthcare is certainly one of them. Education is the other one, but preserving and protecting Utah's public lands is absolutely one of my goals. I will not agree to any projects or proposals that will sell or privatize our public lands. There's a lot of industries out there, coal mining and heavy metals and things, as well as developers that would like to sell off our public lands, and they're going to use the economy as an excuse, saying we need the money, and they'll try to sell our public lands. The public lands, in addition to being a very important resource for our economy, like tourism, it's also a great reservoir for wildlife, wilderness, clean air, and clean water that we definitely need, and we need to preserve it, and I will not have any part in selling off the public lands. We also could do a lot of things with infrastructure, like mass transit. I would like to see mass transit increase between here in Salt Lake City, for instance, and the general area. Automobile traffic is one of the great contributors to dirty air, which we have a lot of, and you can see that every winter when we have the temperature inversions and our air gets so gray and everything. A lot of that is individuals in private cars. Also, I would like to really see the decrease in use of single plastics. Logan was one of the first, I think it was actually the third city in the state of Utah to pass a plastic bag ban, and which was a very forward-thinking thing to do. Unfortunately, the pandemic has put a hold on that because people are afraid of, you know, introducing anything from outside inside the store that they think might. I don't think that's going to be a source of transmitting diseases, really, very little, but I understand. So we have to wait until after the pandemic, but that will definitely be something I'm very interested in, is decreasing single-use plastics.
Okay. Okay. And so I was also wondering, what motivated your decision to run for office?
What motivated me? Well, okay, so my career was in public health. I'm a registered nurse. I grew up in Logan. I actually grew up in River Heights. I was born in Logan. After graduation, we moved to Texas. I worked in a health department down there. I did disease surveillance. I did the investigations of communicable disease outbreaks. So I worked, I did the contact tracing. I know a lot about epidemiology and how you're supposed to combat pandemics and outbreaks and so on. So that I have a lot of interest in healthcare. I also worked with underserved people and uninsured people in Texas. I worked with people who did not have health insurance, and therefore their lives were shortened by having untreated chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension. I saw their teeth falling out of their mouth because they couldn't afford to see a dentist. I worked with people who lost their homes because they got sick and couldn't work and could not see a doctor. People who developed disabling arthritis that got progressively worse because they could not go and get it taken care of, and they ended up having to stop working in their late 50s, which is not, typical for what most people do. So then when I saw that in 2018, the Utah voters passed Proposition 3, which was to expand Medicaid to 130% of poverty. I was thrilled with that. I was so happy to see that the citizens of Utah agreed to expand life-saving health care to Utahns. Well, the legislature, they didn't agree with that. They did not agree with their own constituents. House District 4 voted 60% for people to expand Medicaid. But our representative said no, that he felt that he knew better than the constituents, and they rescinded that. They did expand it, but not nearly to the amount that the voters said. And so that just upset me so much that the legislature would not listen to the will of the people and deny health care to people. And so I thought, and I wanted to volunteer for somebody else. I was in there trying to find a candidate that I could support that would challenge them. Unfortunately, no one was going to run in Logan. I guess they don't want to have, a lot of Democrats don't want to go through the grief and everything of running for office in a very conservative and heavily Republican area like this. So no one would do it. And I really believe in the 50-state strategy, which is where you run a candidate in every state, in every level, all the way up and down the ballot. Because anyway, I thought our legislature needed a challenge.
Okay.
So.
And how does your experience as a nurse, how is that going to impact your time in the office, and like what experiences does that bring to the table, and how does that make you a more valuable politician?
Well, I think it would be a very valuable voice, especially right now in this time of pandemic, which is affecting everything from our economy to our schools, to our supply chains, to our ability to travel. We can't even leave the country. We can't do, as everyone has seen, we can't do anything normal this year because of the pandemic. I feel like I have a lot of good information that I could bring to the legislature. For instance, they're not making wise choices with our public health dollars. They're spending our public health dollars, which are quite limited, but they're spending it on things like worthless medications like hydroxychloroquine. They voted to spend $800,000 on hydroxychloroquine to combat COVID, which was not FDA approved and had no scientific studies. They had to withdraw that because the medical community rose up and said no. They've also voted to get a phone app that doesn't really work, and they had to take that back. And they've also had a lot of problems trying to decide which test to use and how to deploy it, and we're not getting testing and supplies and so on that we need. I could really help. In fact, I really want to help them make better choices with that. The other thing, that there's a lot of basic infrastructure in Utah that we don't have. And a good example of that is we do not have school nurses. And Utah has a very abysmal record of funding 1 nurse to 7,000 students, which is very, very below the national standards. And my time doing disease surveillance in the health department, if there was an outbreak of something in the school, whether it was measles or diarrhea or chicken pox or TB or anything, the first thing you do is you get the school nurse to help do the surveillance of the schools and also do the education and help implement the control measers. We don't have school nurses here, so they are having the teachers having to do the health assessments of the children when they come in. They have secretaries that are injecting insulin into the children rather than a school nurse. So anyway, one thing I would really like to do when I get in there is to get school nurses. We have the funding. It's just a matter of priorities. And we can see from what we're going through that we are not saving money by skimping on school health right now.
Okay. Okay. And you touched on a little bit about how Utah has responded to COVID-19, but how well overall do you think that they've responded to it? And considering your experience as a nurse and in the health department, what would you have done differently?
Well, in the beginning, I think that locally we did quite well. I think everyone really came together and was very willing to stay home and to follow the guidelines. And so I would say in the very beginning of the year, back in March, we locally as a community did very well. But as time went on, people have gotten very, very fatigued with the issue. It impacted so many people's jobs. People lost their jobs. All small businesses have been affected tremendously. And unfortunately, it's become a very political issue, and it seems like people are not really listening to what the medical experts are saying. And in fact, our leaders are not modeling the right behavior either. They're not willing to make the hard decisions. This is a very unusual outbreak. We have got to get it under control. If we just keep doing these half measures or a little bit here and a little bit there, but not the whole community, we're going to still be dealing with this at Christmas time and next spring break. I understand USU has already canceled spring break. Yeah. In September. That's a very sad commentary. And now I'm rattling on and I forgot your question.
I just wanted to know how you would have handled the situation differently than we have so far.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, and Utah couldn't do it alone either. Utah has done their best. This really required a national response. And I don't know if you want a history lesson, but our country did have pandemic response plans in place. And I'm going to digress a little bit. Back when I was a public health nurse, I was a nurse at 9/11, 2001, when we had the big terrorist attacks. And after that, we had the anthrax attacks, and people were very afraid of smallpox attacks. And so at that time, the government really put a lot of money into all the health departments and beefed up epidemiologists, and we called it bioterrorism preparedness. So my perfectly good public health nurse job morphed into bioterrorism preparedness, which I really didn't like, but they did put lots and lots of money into that. Lots of epidemiologists, they hired tons of people, and we were all ready. And of course we had no bioterrorism, thank God we did not have smallpox. But they morphed all of that preparedness into like an all hazards approach to be more prepared for things like hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, and including outbreaks. And so we as the nation became very well prepared. We had lots of money into the CDC, health departments, and we knew, we were able to really be ready for novel flu viruses or whatever. Well, unfortunately, the last few years, this administration did not think that was worthwhile, and they eliminated a lot of that infrastructure. They cut money to the CDC, they trashed the pandemic response plans, and they fired a lot of people in the CDC and other organizations that were ready to respond to that. So we were unprepared. And so unfortunately, this has been one of the great tragedies of the 21st century, is how unprepared as a nation we are. And we can see that that's true because you can look at all the other countries in the world and see how did they had the same disease, the same circumstances. Australia has it under control, New Zealand, Europe is having a resurgence, but they were able to get it back so that people could go back to normal and they can attend schools, they can eat in restaurants, travel. No one wants Americans to travel to their country right now. Anyway, that's a long answer to that. I think Utahns have done well, except that it's become politicized now and people, I mean, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult now because there's a lot of people who just don't believe authority. You know, when they tell them that there's a problem, they just, I don't know, it's going to be really tough now.
Mm-hmm. And so another major issue right now, considering racial justice and police reform, how would you plan to address these issues in Utah?
Okay, so the question is on racial
justice and police reform.
Justice and police, yeah. Absolutely, that's a very important, very important issue. And unfortunately, there has been a lot of bias in all segments of society, where people make a lot of judgments in advance just by the way people look or the way they speak or the way, you know, their last name, that sort of thing. There's a lot of fear of people that look and sound different from yourself. And I'm even talking about our own subcultures within the United States. You know, you meet people who are of a different race and culture, and they sound and they look different. And unfortunately, the police also respond to that and tend to overreact sometimes when, you know, when they're brought into a situation, they will. So we absolutely have to address that. Training from day one and a lot of retraining of our police departments of, you know, sensitivity. And we also need to have diversity on our police forces. They need to have very assertive recruitment for people from all the communities, to get people from every segment of our communities need to be represented in the police, in the fire, in the legislature, in the local governments, everywhere. We need to be more inclusive and really more colorblind.
Okay. And why are these issues, specifically racial justice and police reform, why do you think that they are important?
Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious that that the laws are sometimes applied differently to different groups of people. You know, that I mean, this thing with Breonna Taylor right now, you can see the no-knock warrants where they bust in to the wrong address and kill the people inside, you know, and they were in the wrong address. I don't think that would have happened in a different zip code, in a different, you know, in a wealthier part of town with a, you know, I just don't think that would happen. I think that, and people have responded tremendously to that. There's a lot of hurt feelings. It has really, the reason it's brought out such a tremendous response is because our communities of color say this is not new. This is something that is very hurtful for them because they have lived for generations with being prejudged and not accepted. And, you know, it's a terrible feeling to go into a store and have the owners of the store watching you to think if you're going to be shoplifting, and, you know, someone else goes in and they're, you know, welcomed, and, you know, they're, yes, I think this is a extremely important issue, and we definitely need to address it.
Okay. And for the last question, if you had to condense your platform into a single tweet, that's like 280 characters,
Oh,
how would you condense that into the tweet?
I should have a tweet like that, you know. I'll work on that, because that's a really good idea, and I should have that. And I don't know off the top of my head, William. I do know my slogan of my campaign is for a healthy democracy. And I do like that slogan very much, because it's coming at it from two issues. One is, like you said, we have here in Cache Valley a very heavy one-party representing everybody. And that means that people are really taking our votes for granted. I think that a lot of the politicians here, they fought really hard during the primary, and now that the primary is over, they're just sitting back and waiting to, you know, collect their keys to the office. And so I think it's really a healthy democracy to have a good, vigorous discussion of the issues, you know, from a two-party system. And plus the healthy democracy, meaning that we can't really do anything if we're not healthy as a people. You know, if we're sick and dying, or afraid of sick and dying, and we can't open our businesses, we're not going to be a healthy society like that. So, so I'm sorry I don't have your tweet, but you could quote my my slogan for a healthy democracy.
Okay, great. And is there anything else you'd like to say that we haven't really touched on yet? If
Well,
not, okay.
yeah, no, actually, and I don't know if you're just looking at local races, or if you're looking at statewide or larger, but one thing that I think is a very, for you as a reporter especially, is try and see where the funding of all these campaigns are coming from. My campaign is funded by small donations from individuals. I have said I will not take any corporate money. I will not take any money from, you know, oil and gas or any corporations whatsoever, because people work for who pays their salary. And right now, all of us in the Utah, we're having to file a report. It's September the 30th that will go into the Lieutenant Governor's office. And I suggest you go to, write this down, you got to go to a website called disclosures.utah.gov. Disclosures.utah.gov. And with that, they have you can click on public view, and you can see all the people who are running for state offices, and you can see where are they getting their money from. And of course, I'm just having donations from individuals and nonprofits, but there's a lot of special interest money going into our legislators, and I find it really kind of alarming. Some of the people are getting a lot of money from, say, for instance, Title Max and the predatory lenders, the payday lenders, and these are people who are supposed to regulate the payday lenders. And if they're taking huge amounts of money from that, how are they going to regulate them? Same thing with the home builders associations, the oil and gas, all of these industries that are giving money to legislatures. I mean, a lot of money, and then they get elected. How are they going to turn around and say no to them when they want to come and buy some of our public land? You know, they want to open a uranium mine right next to one of our parks, and they want to slice off or, you know, use up all the water that would go to the local population. How are those legislators going to say no? They're not going to say no. They're going to work for who pays their salary. So I think that would be a really interesting thing for you as a reporter. And after they get elected, follow along and see what are they voting for and how are they voting for it, and comparing that to who is giving them money in their donations. And I think that would be very enlightening.
Okay.
So,
Sounds good then. Yeah. That was disclosures.utah.gov, right?
right. There's also other websites like followthemoney.org and opensecrets.org. I don't know if it's .org or .com, but Open Secrets and Follow the Money. You can see, those are more national, but you can definitely see which special interests are funding and Utah, unfortunately, there is no limit in the amount of money that people can give Utah politicians, which is sad. So there's a lot of special interest money there, which is unfortunate for democracy. So,
Okay. Well, thank you for that information as well.
okay.
That is all my questions for you. Thanks again for the interview. This should be transcribed into our political issue. I believe it's this next week. So you can.
Are you going to write up something for the Utah Statesman?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you. And good luck with your journalism career there.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, William.
Thank you. Bye.